Well, good evening. I'm Charles Schultz, and this is the Randomizer. And this is for, wow, Friday already, the 11th of March, 2022. And tonight's subject is going to be Laura Bassi. Of all the amazing people that I've read about and learned about, she's certainly one of the most interesting and outstanding. Actually, the very first woman in history to get a full doctorate, and also the second to get a doctorate of philosophy. It was a doctorate of science and a doctorate of philosophy. So she was an extremely interesting intellectual who lived in Bologna, Italy, and we'll get right to her in just a few moments here. So, we're making some huge changes and upgrades at schultzlaboratories.com and universesciencecenter.com, and I encourage people to come to the site, study what we have, go through our galleries, get your Oculus, have some fun with it. We have rooms where you can try to put a moon in orbit around a planet, and some other rooms where you can study computer logic gates dynamically. And we're adding a lot more in the astronomy and the mathematics rooms very shortly. So go there, click through the links, become a member, and have a lot of fun with it. We really encourage it. We're trying to spread evenly all over the world the opportunity for people to learn science and physics and mathematics. And I think this is probably the best way to do it. A virtual environment that kids will treat like a game, and they'll stick in here for hours and hours playing with the things and learning all along. That's the best way to learn. Make it fun. So, Laura Bassi, what an amazing story. She was born in 1711 and died in 1778, and was so admired for her skill in logic and reasoning and in physics that actually friends of Benjamin Franklin traveling in Italy were so excited to hear her lecture and to meet her that they had written when they got back to the Americas, they were going to tell him they had met her, this personality. So she was an Italian physicist and one of the earliest women to gain a position in an Italian university. She really was presented as being the Newtonian physicist. And Newton, as you know, established a lot of the early mathematics and physics principles in optics and in gravitation. And so to be presented as the one who understood his work very clearly and could argue on its merits and present it very easily, that's a big thing for the time. One of the things that she did was she duplicated his prism experiments, playing with the spectrum, how the light was split, and learned a lot of things just through hands-on experimentation. And she was a very accomplished physicist. Now, she did admit that early in her career, she did not get heavily into mathematics, and then later she rectified that. We'll get to that. In 1732, she actually was appointed as a professor of university philosophy. And at that time, in like March, she debated and presented 49 theses in Latin, and the people would crowd in an audience just to hear her lecture and give her explanations on the properties and the methods on physics and everything about it. And so she was such an eloquent speaker and a logical reasoner that people would come from all around just to hear her talk. So that's not a small thing when you think about it. They would crowd into her house to hear this 20-year-old physicist woman debate about every aspect of physics and philosophy and just first principles. And so quite the celebrity. And when she was appointed to the University of Bologna, they worried that having a woman in such a prominent position was going to, well, negatively affect them because it would encourage other women to register with the university and attempt to gain learning and position as well. And you can't imagine the sort of difficulties people might have had 200 or 300 years ago if they were female and in the sciences. And even today, we do see some holdover thinking like that. I can think of a half dozen right off the top of my head, scientists and physicists who were women that just really didn't get the credit that they needed in astrophysics and geology and biochemistry and mathematics. I know a number of people saw the movie Hidden Figures about the woman who did the mathematics that helped them plot the moon flights. This is something that has taken a very long time to address and to set right. But she was certainly a pioneer. And I had to make some notes. There were just so many interesting points I wanted to make here. So if I'm looking down, I'm referring to this paper. So there were restrictions placed on her teaching because they were worried about her rise to prominence. And some of those restrictions were so insulting and irritating to her, she actually requested that the restrictions be lifted. And it took months and years, and the university wouldn't give in. She was ignored the whole time. She increased her studies so that she become more prevalent in value as a scientist. And so this is something that she was really devoted to. She devoted her life, even as a child, she was recognized as a prodigy. And a number of prominent scientists who were family, friends, and members would help her to gain education and entry into locations where they could just show off her amazing, prodigious memory and reasoning skills. She requested a license to read a lot of the books that had been prohibited by the Roman Catholic Church. And I know a lot of people are aware of the fact that at that time, many scientists and physicists produced works that, while factual, put the church in an unhappy light. They didn't like the thought, for instance, Galileo's work, that we were not the center of the universe. And Descartes' reasoning about the universe being pretty much a cause and effect series of events. So she requested that these restrictions be lifted, and the Catholic Church denied them. She felt that it was necessary to read the works of people such as Galileo and Descartes to fully understand their viewpoint on science and physics and see how it might increase her, let's say, arsenal. So when you really think about it, there was not much you could do if you ran head-to-head with the church, and that's true. At that time, she recognized her lack of mathematical skills and began studying calculus. And a lot of people know that Newton made a number of big contributions to calculus. And he wasn't necessarily the inventor of calculus. One of the things you'll see at that time is 2 or 3 different prominent people will have invented or come up with the same thing almost simultaneously. And it's only when their published notes cross path that people realize that they worked on the same thing. So sometimes giving attribution to the invention of, like, calculus, for instance, is a little difficult because many people saw the utility of it and began working on it. So she did experimentation. No, I'm sorry. She said at that point in her understanding that experimentation without a proper mathematical foundation and physical foundation was to know only half of what you needed to learn to do physics after Newton. And what she was saying was, it was recognized that by the time Newton's foundation for optics and physics had been put in place, it was seen that the just native understanding of physics was no longer going to suffice, that you actually had to have some fairly advanced mathematical reasoning and understanding, some skill, in order to truly understand what it was you were finding out. And that's true today. A lot of people feel a draw to the subject of science or physics, and they fail to get the mathematics necessary to really see the model properly, to be able to write it down, figure it out, and make some predictions. And, I often like to paraphrase Lord Kelvin, where he said essentially, if you can't say anything about it in numbers, you really don't know anything about it. And you know what? That's absolutely true. It's easy for us to say, well, when a current goes through this wire, it makes a magnetic field. But the salient questions are, well, how much current, at what voltage, and how big a field, and what does it mean? So those are things that can only be answered by having a mathematical equation. Because then you can say, well, with these measurements, then I would predict that this should follow. So it's an extension of our senses into that abstract realm. And one of the things that really sets us apart from the animals, mathematical reasoning. So she did hold her chair in the University of Bologna for many years. And eventually, in 1776, she assumed the chair of experimental physics. She was the head. She was a full professor, and so she was the first woman in history to attain a full academic professorship. And that's pretty astounding when you really think about it. Now, there's so much more to say about her, and I would encourage anyone to look up the biography of Laura Bassi. But I'd also like to point out that there were many people, many women in physics and mathematics over history that we don't hear about who actually made exceptionally interesting and critical contributions. For instance, Rosalind Franklin. Everybody knows about Crick and Watson discovering the structure of DNA. And Francis Crick was explaining the structure of DNA to his son. What he didn't say was that one of their co-researchers, Rosalind Franklin, was she was an exemplary worker in the field of, she's a scientist in genetics. And she was the first person to actually show the structure of the DNA molecule. And it seems, you know, I don't know. I believe in attribution. I believe in giving people credit for what they've done. And Francis Crick did not give Rosalind Franklin the credit for discovering the structure of DNA. And that is really it's a crime. Let's face it. You can't steal other people's thunder. It doesn't make sense, and it's not a very honest thing to do. Lise Meitner, the physicist, this is the one that really gets me. She was given absolutely no credit for her research for decades. However, in the end, it kind of worked out because she has an element named after her, element 109, Meitnerium. I don't know anybody personally who has an element named after them, so that's pretty big. Well, here's another one. Now, a lot of times we always think in terms of scientists and their discoveries, but often enough, it's an everyday person who's just a little sharper than the rest of the tacks who comes up with something amazing. And one of the stories that really struck me that I didn't hear about until I was actually working in defense systems, we have something called band agile or frequency agile radio. The idea is if you're broadcasting a one channel, somebody else can find that channel and they can jam it, and your communications is no good. So the actress Hedy Lamarr had the idea, what if you made a radio that tuned rapidly to a number of different channels, different stations, and sent and received on those agile frequencies? The radio would literally be hopping from channel to channel so rapidly that you would not have a chance to jam the information. And so frequency agile radio or frequency hopping radio was invented by the American actress Hedy Lamarr. And so you never really hear about credit for things like that, but she did invent something that was crucial to our defense. And today, we use spread spectrum signals which can take advantage of those, the useful properties of getting around noise or interference. If you have a Wi-Fi system in your home, and I bet just about 90% of everybody who I'm reaching does, if you have one of those Wi-Fi systems, it has the ability to recognize when there is interference on a channel and then choose a different channel, or if necessary, to hop from channel to channel in some cases. And spread spectrum does a lot of good things for you as well. It gives you a little edge over the background noise, definitely. So there are many things to know that women have invented, many in physics, nuclear physics, chemistry, biology, mathematics. And I do encourage people to look up Laura Bassi because it's an excellent starting point to see, even through the fact that the university was working against her interests and kept her on kind of like an amazing pet, rather than giving her her full academic potential growth early in her career. In the end, she did attain a full professorship. But what more could have been done if her career had not been littered with stumbling blocks along the way? And this is something to think about. There are a lot of really dedicated and great scientists who don't get anywhere, not because somebody doesn't believe in them, but because people are intentionally making it difficult for them. And I want people to realize we often do that to people without thinking about it. We often stand in people's ways, not out of intent, but just as a natural reaction to what we're seeing or hearing. We should be a little more aware of that. If we're just 5 or 10% more aware of our tendency to dismiss what other people say or what they're doing, or to devalue or ignore the value of their work, I think things could get a lot better fast. If you get into the habit of considering the worth of somebody else's idea, maybe that's a good thing, you know? So, if anybody has any questions, the floor is open. And I don't know if I can handle a lot of questions about Laura Bassi in particular, because while I did learn about her quite a bit, there are biographies online, and this is a subject I only saw the first time this morning, although I was aware of her. I didn't really study her history. but I will do the best I can to address whatever questions are presented. And in the meantime, I'm going to make my quote for the day. And this is from Proverbs. Let not mercy and truth forsake you. Bind them around your neck and write them on the tablet of your heart. And so find favor and high esteem in the sight of God and man. So that's Proverbs 3, 3, and 4. And that's pretty amazing. Have mercy and truth, and it'll go a long way. And a lot of people will say, it's kind of a cynical saying, hey, if you don't lie about anything, you don't have anything to remember. It certainly makes life easier. So, if there are no questions or suggestions on the floor, I'm going to wish everybody a great weekend and just have fun, be good to people. And as I always say, make the world a better place. I know it'll be a lot better for all of us. And on that note, have a great time, enjoy yourself, and I hope to see you Monday, 6 p.m. on the Randomizer. Thank you, everybody. Have a great weekend.